God has placed a calling on my life, just as he's placed one on yours. And we shouldn't go into these things willy-nilly. God wants us to be prepared. He wants to equip us so we have a firm foundation, so that when the ground beneath us begins to shake, we don't sink and we don't fall. Sometimes, though, to get through to firm foundations, we've got to go through doors. And some doors have keys. So where we're going to start on this journey is with the first key that God gave me.
For so long, I felt church was a place to go because as a Christian it was expected of me. I was often dissatisfied as I sat there counting down the minutes until I'd be able to go home. And it certainly didn't help that mingling with people is not my favourite place to be. So when I embarked on this season, this current adventure that I'm stepping out into, I realised that so many of my frustrations came from the fact that I wanted to go deeper with my relationship with God, not deeper into the church scene. Look, without question, the form and function of church serve a purpose, but I wanted more. I needed different. So, you and I, we're going to start where it started for me. So, this journey that we're going on is going to start with God's but first. See, God has placed a calling in my life as he's placed one on yours. And the thing with callings, though, is you can't just throw yourself willy-nilly into whatever it is ahead of you. No more than a soldier can go in a battle being unprepared. When God calls you, he wants to equip you. He wants to ensure that as you step out with a firm foundation underneath you, so that when the ground begins to shake, you don't fall and you don't sink. Every solid foundation, though, has to begin with a first step. And when I agreed to do this thing, God said words to me to the effect of, "Great! But first, you must meet me in my throne room, and you must allow yourself to be stripped bare in front of me." What? Beg your pardon? Okay. Simple, really, isn't it? Except that it's not. Now might be the perfect time to take a deep breath, because this is where we're going to start pushing deeper. Remember when I said that God has a calling and a place for us? Well, it says so. 2 Timothy 1:9 says God saved us, called us to a holy life, not because of anything we have done, but because of his own purpose and grace. God has a purpose for us. Hear that. Understand that. His purpose for us. Now, no one calling is better than another, even if to our eyes it may appear that way. See, because God views things very differently to the way we do. Our view can be really limited, whereas he looks at a bigger picture and he assigns tasks according to the giftings that he has placed within us. Romans 12:6 says we have different gifts according to the grace given us. Now, there are two things that you can do with this information. One is simple, you can do nothing. You can stay where you are in your comfort zone, keep plodding along, and you can probably even be happy. Or two, you can embrace the calling that God has placed on your life. You can follow whatever crazy path it is that he's set out in front of you. And sure, yeah, it may be risky. You know, it may even make no sense at some times. But when you get to the end of it, you'll know that you gave everything you had and that you lived your absolute best life. That's a pretty good goal to have, don't you think? Now, I don't know what God is saying to you. And quite frankly, that's got nothing to do with me. That's between you and him. But let me make it clear, though. For one person, serving as a greeter at church or in the cafeteria. That could be just plodding through life. That could be them living in their comfort zone. But for someone else, stepping into those places, that could be exactly where you need to be, where God has placed you to be. See, not everyone is called to be up front. And the people that are up front, there is a whole plethora of people working behind the scenes to make sure everything happens. So much work is done behind the scenes, and it is all essential, and God values all of it. We all have a place. So, let's head a bit further, and let's get a little bit deeper. If you choose to take the second option, if you choose to embrace God's calling on your life, then we need to spend some quality time with Him in preparation. How do we do that? Well, that is in the instruction manual. Hebrews 4:16 says, "Let us approach the throne of grace with confidence, so we may receive mercy and find the grace to help us in our time of need." I don't know how many times in my Christian walk that I've read that verse or heard that verse. And yet, when I was putting this together, I had an epiphany. When you're convicted of God's calling in your life, getting that calling done, that becomes a need. It's not a want in your life. I think for me that verse, it's always been a promise, but within that it's always seemed rather passive. I think I always seem to think that it was saying that God's going to see that you have everything you need when you need it. So don't worry if things stuff up or if things go a little bit wrong. God's got this. 2 little quick points on this matter. Note that it says need, not want. And we've probably all been guilty of expecting and asking for our wants rather than our needs. I know I certainly have been. And the other thing I think to remember is that sometimes what we think is a need isn't what God knows to be a need. I think sometimes He probably goes, yeah, thank you for your prayers, but, how about you go away and come back to me again when you've had a little think about a few things. Seriously though, you may believe that you need that job, but it's entirely possible that God has a different plan for you. And that's just one of the 1,000 different options that could be said at this point. I'm not going to talk about prayer at this moment because so many books have been written and so many sermons have been said about prayer that now is not really the time to elaborate on that topic. I just want to get back to the throne room. Even knowing that my calling was more towards intercession and warfare, I guess I still unintentionally viewed that verse through the lens of worldly stuff. I kind of thought that meant that God would make sure I was never hungry or that my bills would always be paid. And even when I first wrote this verse down in relation to researching this, I still had that very superficial grasp on it. I simply didn't have the deeper revelation that I've got now. And the deeper is where we need to go. It's what I want to share with you. So to that end, we're going to break that verse down just a little bit. Start at the beginning. Let us approach the throne of grace with confidence. Now we know that we come to God through prayer, and Jesus Himself gave us an example of how to pray. I'd like to note here, though, that I think the Lord's Prayer is one that has a focus on the structure of prayer rather than the manner in which we can approach God. To look for a manner in which we can come to God with that confidence, I'm going to look at the story of Martha. John 11 tells the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. Now Martha is where I'm going to focus. See, her brother had already passed. By the time she heard Jesus was coming, it was to all intents and purposes too late. But when she heard that He was on His way, she ran out to meet Him. And she said to Him, "Jesus, you're late. If you'd have been here, my brother, well, he'd still be here. He wouldn't have died. But, Jesus, I know that God will give you whatever you ask, even if it looks too late for me. There is something in the manner in which she approaches Jesus that speaks of strength and confidence to me. She was not timid in her approach. I can see her running down that road, eyes flashing, with sadness and maybe a bit of anger. She was probably determined. She stood upright, held her back straight. She didn't wait for him to come to her. This matter, for her, was way too important. So she approached him, not thinking for a moment that he would turn her away. That is confidence. Now, when it comes to approaching the throne, I get that there can be a little niggly voice in the back of your head that says, hang on, this is God. You can't just go up to him like that. And I think it's due to this kind of thinking that people will shuffle their way in and approach the throne timidly, with their head hung low, afraid to actually ask God to meet their needs. In this way, they're scared to step out into the deep. The other side of that is some people approach the throne rather flippantly. They have little thought as to the power and the position of the king who sits in that throne. They assume, demand, expect blessings to be bestowed on them, regardless of the state of their hearts. Now, neither of these attitudes is what confidence is. There are, of course, those like myself who have been hurt. And we can come to God asking, pouring our hearts out. And then at the end of it all, we put a caveat on it that says, not my will, but yours. Now that's in the Bible. And yes, absolutely, it is in how Jesus instructed us to pray. The thing is, if we're not careful, that simple little phrase, that can become a crutch. I know for myself that I've said it more than once, because I think deep down I didn't actually expect God to answer my prayer. So I convinced myself that if I put it on the end of my prayer, it doesn't matter if my prayer gets answered, that's still an answer. It was my way of covering all my options. And in this way I could hide my feelings of unworthiness. By the way, unworthiness, that's not confidence either. Now, don't get me wrong. Not my will but yours. It's incredibly important. I think that particular phrase is there to remind us to remain humble. The thing is, we don't always see the big picture. And I don't think God ever intended us to use it as an excuse in our prayers. Anyway, having established what confidence isn't, let's look at what it is. Or rather, how I picture it. I think back to that day, and back to Martha. She made eye contact. She stood up straight. She carried in her the knowledge that she belonged in that situation. See, she was able to do that because Jesus had established a relationship with her. And it is in this way that we need to think at the moment. God has established a relationship with us. More than that, it's not just a random relationship. God calls us his children. Corinthians 6:18 says, "And I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me." Again, Romans 8:14 says, "For all are being led by the Spirit of God, and these are the sons of God." Galatians 4:7 says, "You are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir." And John 1:12 says, "He gave the right to become children of God." That's some pretty powerful words. It's a pretty powerful thought. Children have the right to approach their father. They should always be able to do that. Or at least in my world, that's the way it should be. And I am sure that that opportunity carries over into the heavenly realm. Here's the thing though. As women, we know approaching God as a father isn't always as easy as it sounds. Patriarchal systems and families, they've given women very little authority. I mean, even for many years, the church itself gave women very little authority. Things such as abuse and domestic violence and inequality have all taken a toll on women's psyche. To this end, it colours the way we see God as a Father King, and in that colouring it affects the way that we approach the throne. So here's something that I think we need to really know, to really understand. And if you don't, well, you need to start to get this as a revelation in your heart. God already knows. He already knows everything that's in you. He knows it better, perhaps, than we do. The way it's affected us, the toll it's taken on us, how it impacts every aspect of our life. He knows the baggage that we bring with us into every part of our lives. We women, we're good at hiding things. We push stuff aside and just get on with what we need to get on with. But continuing to do that isn't what God wants, not even a little bit. When God was talking to me about this whole endeavour, we had some very frank conversations. I did a lot of questioning because deep down I didn't feel worthy. This is my baggage. There's been a lot of rejection in my life, battles with mild depression, even a period that involved some self-harm. I've been hurt by a lot of people, and I've been hurt by the church. I had an alcoholic father. All these things, they leave a mark on my life. I even started down the path of women's ministry quite a number of years ago now. Only I was cut down by church leaders. Subsequently, I was proven right in what I'd said, but that really only gave me minimal satisfaction. The result of all of that, though, was that my passion was diminished. Church became something that, I attended out of obligation. Then there were other things, other issues. And these all just drove me further from the church. In fact, I really only started going back to church when my hubby started playing again. And because my daughter was hungry, she was searching for God. Over the years, I've been told that I'm prickly, abrasive, difficult to get to know. I also apparently have the most resting bee face ever. I am not someone that's big on small talk. I'm not comfortable doing a lot of those traditionally female things such as hair and makeup and clothes shopping. Even when it comes to my viewing, my movies, I'm not a big fan of rom-coms. As a general rule, give me John Wick any day of the week. At the bottom of it all, though, I feel that I don't fit. I am certain that I'm not women's ministry material, or any ministry for that matter. People that go into that always seem far nicer and far more put together than me. So I said all this to God, and he said back to me, I haven't called you because you fit other people's picture. I've called you because you fit mine. It's that baggage that I need. It's the baggage that I can use. I have others to be nice and to be gentle. What I need right now is that stubborn voice. That person that isn't afraid to get into people's faces. The person that is rantingly passionate. The one I know can stand. And even when knocked down will get back on her feet and stand. Mosquito. I need that thick rhino skin. I need your abrasive personality. And I need your unwillingness to go quietly into the night. I need the person who will keep swinging, keep fighting, even if they have a black eye and a split forehead. It's that you that I need. It's the ability to struggle back up, set your feet, raise your tired arms, that glaring, daring look that you get and the voice that shouts, "Is that all you've got? Well, bring it!" I guess you could say God knows me well. He knows how to speak my language.
We're going to break off now because I think now is as good a time as any to stop and do a little bit of thinking. What I want you to consider is how you come to God and where and how he meets you on your level. If we are going to continue down this deeper journey, we need to be prepared to do some serious self-assessment. We need to know where our holdouts are in our relationship with God. We need to understand what excuses we make, because it is knowing and understanding these things that is going to help us as we continue on this path.